For the record, 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 for the record.
War Rapport family, it's your guy Mike G here with my boy C Dub, and this is For the Record. Okay, War Rapport insiders. This week's For the Record is about blue chip ratio percentage along the offensive line. Now, this week's stats come courtesy of Justin Ferguson at the Auburn Observer. And Justin sent us some interesting stats about the percentage of your line that is made up of blue chip prospects. Now, what is that? That's 4 or 5 star recruits. And we're using 247 composite rankings to define blue chip. So I'm going to put some stats up here, Caesar, and I wanted to get your thoughts on the percentages. Okay, so what we have here on this chart are the top 15 teams in terms of overall blue chip percentage. And the percentage that we see out here is the percentage of their offensive line that are blue chips. So all these teams right here, Alabama, of course, being number 1, we're top 15 in terms of getting 4 or 5 stars, but 86% of Alabama's O-line is made up of 4 or 5 stars. So you can look at the schools in the middle. I think that anybody looking at this can see a correlation between some schools that we see here who have definitely had some success over the last 10 years and the percentage of their O-line that is made up of blue chippers. When you look at this graph here, Caesar, what's the thing that stands out to you?
I mean, of course, Auburn being at the bottom of that 15% of the top 15 schools with blue chip ratio percentages, along the offensive line being 20%, putting us dead last and distant away from everyone else in this list. And we can tell just by watching playoffs in past years to the teams who have had success. These teams have done well along the offensive line. These are teams that were not getting pushed around by opposing defensive lines. And so when you look at what Auburn did in 2020, going into that season, it tells the story as to how we had many struggles along our own offensive line.
Yeah, I look at this list and I think, man, this is very, 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 very telling in terms of we have been finishing with a top 9 recruiting class overall, but we have not had many wins in terms of that recruiting along the offensive line. Now, we all know the story. No freshman signees under Gus for years and years and years. And this chart kind of tells that story. Now, I want to move on to another aspect of this that I really think will be telling for a lot of our insiders. How have we done over the past 8 years in terms of percentage of our O-line being blue chippers? Because top 9 recruiting classes on average over the last 10 years have not really translated to good O-lines. And what did those O-lines look like when we did have success? So these were the previous 8 years under our last coach. In 2013, 62% of our O-line was made up of blue chippers. You can see the numbers kind of jump up and down here, but I want to throw it to you, Caesar. When you look at this list, again, what stands out to you?
To me, the years that we've had the most offensive success and we were the most productive happen to be the years where we've had the highest of offensive line blue chip ratio percentages. We know what happened in 2013. We had a pretty good year the following year in 2014. And 2017, we were a win away from the college football playoff, right? So when we look at the other years, those were years where our offensive output left a lot to be desired. And the correlation is our blue chip ratios was a lot lower than years where we were actually productive.
When I look at this, I think to myself, even in 2013 and 2017, which stand out in terms of years where our blue chip ratio was higher, those offensive lines weren't great. We had great running backs. We had great quarterbacks. So a quarterback that was dynamic at something, either running or passing. Nick Marshall, I think no one will argue, he was a dynamic dynamic athlete at quarterback, and it helped cover up for a lot of woes that we had along that offensive line because he could get away from a lot of people. Jarrett Stidham was an accurate quarterback. In 2017, he got sacked a lot. As a matter of fact, in 2017, he got sacked 36 times by an offensive line made up of 62% blue chippers. What I see here, what stands out to me is a failure in scheme. Regardless of how many blue chippers you're getting along the offensive line, you still need to be able to scheme around your talent. What we see here on this chart is an inability to do that. So Caesar, I want to go back to the previous chart for just a second to talk about some of these other schools and their percentages and what they've been able to do with the percentage of blue chippers that they've had. Now, when we go back to this list, Alabama obviously stands out because they are just recruiting well at every position. But there are some other teams here who have had some success over the last, 10 years that even last year, because this is the 2020 offensive line blue chip ratio, they did not have a super high percentage compared to some of their peers in terms of blue chip. Which school stands out to most to you on this list in terms of success they had versus the percentage of blue chippers on the offensive line?
Well, the schools that jump out to me, Mike, is Florida, Texas A&M. You look at Clemson, who actually made the playoffs. These are schools who they're not up there with Alabama, not even close. But when you evaluate what an A&M was able to do, development comes into play, right? You coach these kids up to where they're playing like blue chippers, even though from a recruiting composite standpoint, they were not blue chippers, right? So to me, I think it tells a story that while recruiting isn't everything, it is a big piece of the puzzle. And you would love to be somewhere like in Alabama where you have the best of both worlds. I look at what Florida was able to do, and you've talked about, and you can add some stats to what Florida has done. Florida's pass pro wasn't all that great, but yet they had one of the most dynamic passing offenses in 2020, but look where they were going into the season. So to me, those things stand out to me in terms of how you have a coaching staff that while their blue chip ratio may not be where it needs to be, they're able to compensate with that by excellent coaching and player development.
Yeah, I would say that Florida and Clemson definitely stand out to me on this list. What Florida was able to do with only 38%, and to put that in perspective for everybody, that's about one more blue chipper than we had. One more blue chipper will move your percentages about 18%. So they had about one more blue chipper than we did, and their offense was one-dimensional. They did not have much of a run game last year, and in spite of all the pressure that they gave up, they were still able to scheme around lack of inherent talent at offensive line at only 38% blue chip ratio along their offensive line. I think Clemson is the obvious other one that stands out here. When you look at what they've been able to do, always in the conversation at just 47%. I mean, go back and look at the years where Auburn had around 47%. I'm looking at 2015, terrible year, right? 2018, a really disappointing year for us. When we had 38%, that's what Florida was working with. So this really points to an inability to be able to coach up what we have. And I think that it's going to put a paramount importance on our brand new O-line coach, Will Friend, in terms of, hey, what can he do with the guys that we have to get these guys to play like blue chippers, even though they weren't recruited as such. The last thing I want to talk about in this segment is, where are we recruiting? Where are we getting our offensive linemen from? In 2021, these are the states that our offensive linemen have been recruited from. We got 5 guys from Georgia, 3 from Alabama, 3 from Florida, and one lonely one from North Carolina, which was actually recruited by this new staff. So in our last segment, we talked about recruiting spend and how much money we put into recruiting. And this is telling, right? Our footprint is limited to the Southeast when it comes to recruiting offensive linemen. That's going to have to change, I think, under Brian Harsin, for us to make some traction into getting a higher blue chip percentage along that offensive line. Because in the Southeast, you are battling a lot of really good schools for those blue chippers, and schools that have had a better record of talent management and talent development than Auburn has. So the staff really has something to prove. When you look at this again, Caesar, what stands out to you?
I mean, listen, I'm looking at that North Carolina, and that was Harson's staff that brought that kid in. That was our first offensive tackle signee that we've had in a few years. So it's very telling what has been happening under the previous coaching staff. And you say the Southeast, man, listen, our recruitment of offensive line talent and just talent overall has really been reduced to what seems like 3 states. We know last year we were recruiting a lot of kids out of the state of Texas, but pretty much we're looking at Georgia, Alabama, Florida, right? And so I think expanding that recruiting footprint is going to help us be in the running for more blue chippers in other states, because you're not going against the Georgias and Alabamas and the Floridas for those guys. And so I think expanding into a Tennessee, expanding into a Mississippi, expanding into these other states will help expand our reach and get more of these kids. I'll say this also as well, Mike G, is that I would like to see a better approach in how we target our recruits. And I've heard this said by Brian Matthews of Auburn Rivals at Auburn Sports. He made a statement that one of the things that the previous coaching staff would do is that they would zero in on a top target, right? The problem with that is that kid was being targeted by some of the best schools in the country. So when that kid does not choose Auburn, Malzahn and his coaching staff was left scrambling, trying to find a kid who probably would not be considered a blue chipper by the time it's all said and done. And so that was one of the reasons why our BCR, or our blue chip ratio percentage, would fall in previous years in the offensive line because of the recruiting strategy. What I would like to see Harsin and Will Friend do moving forward is not just zero in on one guy, but go after about 3 or 4 guys. Again, expanding the recruiting footprint to where you have a better shot at getting one of these blue chippers, because you're not going against the Georgias and Alabamas and Clemsons and Floridas for the same kid. And you can get someone else who would be a blue chipper who may not be recruited by everyone. So I would like to see a better strategy in terms of how we go after these kids moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. We got to get out of the Southeast. That's what stands out to me. We got to get out of the Southeast, and we got to find kids where they're at. In our interview with Alan Green, we talked about what is the strategy in terms of spending more money to help Harsin expand his recruiting footprint. Alan responded very bluntly in saying that we got to go get the best athletes in the country, no matter where they're at. That's how you're going to compete for championships, and that's how they're going to have to do it moving forward. Because if you're not going to win a large percentage of the kids that you recruit at home in your own backyard, you got to be able to go out and convince some of these guys from a little further away that Auburn is the place for you, where you can realize your athletic potential as an offensive lineman and make it to the next level. Bottom line for Brian Harsin. Well, I know this is a conversation that we'll continue to have as the season goes along about blue chip ratio, and what we put on the field in 2021 will have a big impact on what kind of athletes we're able to get going into the 2022 cycle.
What I'm looking for is just seeing, even if our blue chip ratio percentage is low, and when you got to give Brian Harsin and the coaching staff a little bit of grace, considering the situation and the scenario they walked into when they accepted the job at Auburn. It'll be interesting to see how they're willing to scheme around and disguise a lot of those deficiencies that we may have up front. And that'll be the interesting thing to see. How do they protect the quarterback? How do they get the ball to their athletes in open space? How do they compensate for and take advantage of what opposing defenses are going to try to do, given the limited number of blue chip O linemen that they have up front? That's going to be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to see how it plays out.
War Rapport Insiders, we're looking forward to continuing this conversation with you. Please hit the comments and let us know what you think about Auburn's BCR percentage and our ratio along that offensive line. My name is Mike G. I'm here with C Dubs. This is For the Record.